Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blade didn't just touch his skin, it sang a promise of death against his throat, cold enough to burn, sharp enough to sever the timeline itself. Give me one reason, Duke Kalen Valstein growled, his voice a low tremor of thunder trapped in a cavern. Why I shouldn't paint this floor with your treacherous blood right now, Julian. Julian Vane stared up from his knees, his breath hitching not from fear, though God knows he should be terrified, but from the sheer, suffocating pressure of the man looming over him. This wasn't the opening chapter Julian remembered reading. In the original novel, the villainous Julian Vane was executed on page 3, weeping and pathetic. But the soul now inhabiting this beautiful, doomed body had no intention of dying today. The marble floor of the execution chamber was freezing, biting into his knees through the thin silk of his prisoner's garb, but the fire in Kalen's eyes was hot enough to incinerate the world. Because, Julian whispered, forcing his chin up so the steel bit deeper, drawing a single, crimson bead of blood. I am the only one in this godforsaken empire who knows how to cure your sister. The silence that followed was heavier than the chains binding Julian's wrists. It was a gamble, a desperate, terrifying bluff based on a plot twist from Volume 5 of a book Kalen didn't know he was living in. But as the Duke's obsidian eyes narrowed, wavering between murderous rage and desperate hope, Julian knew he had bought himself the most dangerous thing of all, time. The journey to the north was a slow, agonizing descent into winter. The carriage, an iron-reinforced fortress on wheels, rattled over the cobblestones, moving away from the sun-drenched capital toward the Duchy of Valstein, a land of eternal frost and brutal survival. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken violence. Kalen sat opposite Julian, his broad frame taking up most of the velvet bench. He was a masterpiece of masculine intimidation, midnight black hair falling messily over a forehead scarred by war, jaw clenched tight enough to snap bone, and hands, gloved in black leather, resting on the pommel of his sword. He didn't look at Julian. He looked through him, as if Julian were a stain on the upholstery. Julian shifted, the manacles on his wrists clinking softly. He was exhausted. Transmigrating into the body of the Empire's most hated traitor 3 days ago had been disorienting. Negotiating for his life had been draining. Now, the reality of his situation was setting in. He was the villain. He was the man who had supposedly poisoned Lady Alara, the Duke's beloved younger sister, out of petty jealousy and political maneuvering. Stop breathing so loudly, Kalen snapped, his gaze finally snapping to Julian's face. I'm alive, Your Grace. Respiration is a side effect, Julian replied, his voice dry. He regretted the sarcasm immediately. In a flash of movement too fast for a human, Kalen lunged. His hand wrapped around Julian's throat, pinning him against the carriage wall. The leather of his glove was cold, but the skin beneath it burned. Do not mistake my desperation for mercy, Snake, Kalen hissed, his face inches from Julian's. You are alive because you claimed to possess knowledge of the ancient arts. You claimed you could reverse the necrosis poison. If I find out you are lying, if Alara coughs even once more than usual, I will peel the skin from your bones slowly. Do you understand? Julian couldn't breathe, but he didn't struggle. He looked directly into those abyssal eyes, seeing the raw, bleeding panic hidden behind the wall of rage. Kalen Valstein wasn't just a ruthless tyrant. He was a terrified brother. I understand, Julian choked out. But I need my hands to heal her. Kalen held the stare for a second longer, his thumb brushing against the pulse point on Julian's neck, a touch that was terrifyingly intimate in its lethality, before he released him with a shove. Julian slumped back, gasping, rubbing the reddening marks on his pale skin. We arrive in an hour, Kalen muttered, turning his gaze back to the frozen wasteland outside the window. Pray to whatever dark gods you serve that you are ready. The Duchy of Valstein was a Gothic nightmare of black stone and white snow. The manor, perched on a cliff edge overlooking a frozen sea, looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. As the servants ushered them inside, Julian could feel their glares. They knew who he was. The Vane family name was synonymous with betrayal. He was thrown, quite literally, into a guest room that functioned more like a high-end cell. The windows were barred, and a guard was posted at the door. But Julian didn't rest. He immediately began mentally cataloging the ingredients he would need. In the novel, the cure for Alara wasn't magic. It was a specific combination of rare herbs that grew in the volcanic vents beneath the Valstein estate, mixed with a precise mana filtration technique. The original Julian had been a poisons expert. He had the muscle memory for the alchemy. The current Julian had the foreknowledge of the cure. Whatever contradiction existed in a villain saving his victim had to be smoothed over. If anyone asked why he hadn't cured her sooner, he had his lie prepared. The antidote required the host to be near death for the magical binding to take hold. It was nonsense, but in a world of swords and sorcery, nonsense often passed for wisdom. The doors banged open. "Come," Kalen commanded from the hallway. He had changed from his travel clothes into a loose white shirt and dark trousers, looking less armored but somehow more dangerous. The informality made him look larger, more primal. Julian followed him through the winding corridors to the master wing. The smell of sickness, sweet, rotting lavender, hung heavy in the air. Alara lay in a bed that dwarfed her frail form. Her skin was translucent, blue veins mapping a roadmap of pain across her face. Julian felt a pang of genuine sorrow. The original owner of this body was a monster to do this to a child. "Everyone out," Kalen ordered the weeping maids. They scurried away, leaving the wolf and the viper alone with the dying lamb. "Fix her," Kalen said, his voice devoid of threat now, sounding only hollow. He stood by the bed, gripping the post until the wood creaked. Julian approached the bed. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing thin, pale arms that seemed too fragile for the heavy work of alchemy. He placed a hand on Alara's forehead, closing his eyes to sense the mana flow. It was chaotic, a storm raging inside a teacup. "I need silence, Kalen," Julian said softly, using the Duke's given name for the first time. Kalen stiffened, bristling at the lack of honorific, but he remained silent. For the next 3 hours, Julian worked. It was grueling. He had to channel his own limited mana into her circulatory system to stabilize the poison before he could administer the herbal extract he had requested from the apothecary. The process was agonizing for the caster. It felt like pushing your hands into boiling water. Sweat matted Julian's silver hair to his forehead. His vision blurred. His knees shook. He could feel Kalen's eyes on him, burning, analyzing, waiting for a slip-up. As Julian poured the final drop of the crimson liquid past Alara's lips, he felt his own energy snap. The mana backlash hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, coughing, his chest heaving as black spots danced in his vision. "She's stabilizing," Julian whispered, bracing himself against a table. "Her fever will break in the hour." Kalen rushed to the bed, ignoring Julian entirely. He touched his sister's face, waiting. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, a miracle. Alara took a deep, shuddering breath. The gray pallor of her skin began to recede, replaced by a faint flush of life. Kalen let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He sank to his knees beside the bed, pressing his forehead against her hand. "Thank the gods," he whispered. "You're welcome," Julian murmured, though the words were slurred. The adrenaline crashed. Julian's legs gave out. He expected to hit the hard stone floor, to lie there until a guard dragged him back to his cell. He didn't hit the floor. Strong, calloused arms caught him inches from impact. Julian blinked, his vision swimming, to see Kalen's face hovering above him. The expression was unreadable, confusion, suspicion, and something else. Something intense. "You're bleeding," Kalen said, his voice low. Julian looked down. Blood was dripping from his nose, staining his silk shirt. Mana exhaustion. Occupational hazard. Julian managed a weak smile. "Did I pass the test?" Kalen stared at him. For a moment, the ruthless Duke looked lost. He had hated Julian Vane for years. He had dreamed of killing him. But looking at the man now, pale, broken, bleeding for the sake of the girl he was supposed to have murdered, Kalen's world tilted on its axis. "Sleep," Kalen commanded, but his grip shifted. He didn't drag Julian. He lifted him. Julian was too weak to protest as the Duke of the North carried him bridal style out of the sickroom. His head lolled against Kalen's broad chest. He could smell him, pine, cold steel, and the musky scent of a powerful alpha male. It was intoxicating. "If you kill me in my sleep," Julian mumbled into the Duke's shirt, "you'll never get the second dose." "Shut up," Kalen rumbled, the vibration traveling through Julian's body. But the arms holding him didn't loosen. If anything, they held him tighter. Weeks passed. The dynamic in the manor shifted, subtle as a glacier, but just as unstoppable. Julian wasn't exactly a guest, but he was no longer a prisoner. He was the healer. He spent his days in the library or tending to Alara, who was recovering rapidly. Kalen watched him, always watching. They ate dinner together in the long, cavernous dining hall. At first, it was silent. Then, it became a battle of wits. "You eat like a bird," Kalen commented one evening, watching Julian push peas around his plate. "And you eat like you're afraid the food will run away," Julian retorted without looking up. Kalen paused, fork halfway to his mouth. The servants held their breath. No one spoke to the Duke that way. Then, the corner of Kalen's mouth twitched. A smirk. "The food in the north is tough. Like the people. You'd do well to toughen up, Vane. I survived your dungeon, Your Grace. I think I'm tough enough." Kalen set his fork down, the clatter echoing. He leaned forward, the candlelight casting shadows across his sharp cheekbones. "You survived because I let you. Do not mistake utility for immunity. You are still a Vane. Your father is still plotting to overthrow the Emperor. Once Alara is fully cured, what use will I have for you?" It was the question that haunted Julian's nights. The plot of the novel was still moving. The original Julian's father, the Marquis Vane, was indeed plotting a coup. When that happened, Kalen would be forced to purge the entire Vane line. "Maybe," Julian said, meeting Kalen's gaze with a boldness that surprised them both, "by then, you'll have found a new use for me." The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden, electric tension. Kalen's eyes dropped to Julian's lips, then snapped back up, his pupils blown wide. The predator was looking at the prey, but the hunger had changed. It wasn't about violence anymore. It was about possession. "Careful, Julian," Kalen murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "You are playing with fire in a house made of ice." "I've always liked the heat," Julian countered. The slow burn was agonizing. It was in the way Kalen would brush past him in the hallway, lingering just a second too long. It was in the way Julian found rare, imported books left on his nightstand, gifts Kalen would never admit to sending. It was in the stolen glances across the library, where the hatred had melted into a confused, simmering lust. But peace is a fragile thing in a romance novel. The attack came on the night of the winter solstice ball. The manor was filled with nobles, music, and the clinking of crystal. Julian, dressed in a suit of deep emerald velvet that hugged his slender frame, stood in the shadows of the balcony, watching. He wasn't welcome among the nobility, and he knew it. He felt a presence behind him. He turned, expecting Kalen. Instead, he faced a man in a servant's livery, but the dagger in his hand was military-grade steel. "The Marquis sends his regards," the assassin whispered. "He doesn't like loose ends." Julian's father. Of course. The Marquis realized his son was curing the hostage and had decided to cut his losses. The assassin lunged. Julian scrambled back, tripping over a flower pot. He threw up his hands, bracing for the bite of the blade. Clang. A broadsword intercepted the dagger with a spray of sparks. Kalen stood there, a demon in black formal wear, his eyes glowing with a terrifying blue light. The temperature on the balcony plummeted instantly. Frost crept across the stone railings. "You dare," Kalen snarled, his voice distorted by pure, unadulterated rage, "touch what is mine." The assassin didn't stand a chance. Kalen moved like a blizzard, fast, violent, and overwhelming. With a single, fluid motion, he disarmed the man and drove a fist into his chest, sending him flying over the balcony railing into the snowdrifts below. Kalen spun around, his chest heaving. He looked wild, his composure shattered. He closed the distance to Julian in 2 strides, grabbing him by the shoulders. "Did he touch you?" Kalen demanded, shaking him slightly. "Answer me. Are you hurt?" I'm fine," Julian stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Kalen, I told you." Kalen cut him off, his hands sliding up to cup Julian's face, holding him like he was made of precious, fragile glass. I told you I would peel the skin from anyone who harmed you. That includes your own damn family. I thought that protection was only until Alara was cured, Julian whispered, his voice trembling. Kalen stared at him, the realization crashing down. Alara had been well for days. The contract was fulfilled. And yet, the thought of letting Julian go, or letting him die, felt like tearing out his own heart. To hell with the cure, Kalen growled. You aren't staying alive for her anymore. You're staying alive for me. He didn't give Julian time to process. Kalen crashed his lips onto Julian's. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It tasted of blood, winter air, and desperate, starving need. Julian melted into it, clutching Kalen's lapels, anchoring himself against the storm. The ruthless Duke, the man who was destined to kill him, was now kissing him as if he were the only source of oxygen in the world. Kalen broke the kiss, resting his forehead against Julian's, their breath mingling in the cold air. Stay, Kalen commanded, breathless. Stay in the north. Stay in my bed. Stay with me. We will burn your father's house to the ground together. Julian looked up into the eyes of the villain who had become his savior, the monster who had become his lover. He smiled, a genuine, dangerous smile. As you wish, your grace. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bring the Duke to his knees, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to kill you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,